oxygen-based life forms? Maybe someone should ask Sanderson that at the next non-spoiler Q&A. Hey you geeks! Reading Isles of the Emberdark has me so excited for the Cosmere space age and the operatic drama which will ensue. Sorry, not sorry for singing. But lest we get ahead of ourselves and forget that the space age may be the Cosmere's final destination, but we still have a wonderful, wonderful journey on which to embark. But Roshar's journey seems a lot less, straightforward. We're told we only have 5 more hefty Stormlight books to go, and then it seems like there's going to be a terrible gap between the end of Stormlight 10 and the Mistborn Space Age. Why read if all of our favorite Radiants are going to be dead by the time the space opera gets there? In fact, it was trying to figure out how Jasnah could be alive at the time of Isles of the Emberdark that I came up with this little tangent that became its own video on my theory of how Roshar will build up its space force and technology to be the great imperial force that we see or hear about, at least, in Isles of the Emberdark. So, without further ado, let us consider how long it will take the Cosmere to get from the end of Wind and Truth into deep Cosmere space age, and then theorize about how long it's going to take Roshar specifically to get to the Cosmere space age, and how they will be able to adapt their technology along the way. Again, full spoilers for the entire Cosmere. How long until the space age? In terms of books, we know that Sanderson has said repeatedly that the original Cosmere timeline would come to a dramatic final conclusion in the Mistborn Space Age, then originally planned as Era 3, but now pushed back to 4 because cyberpunk, and 16 is a cool number. On the Roshar side, we're only guaranteed another 5 books of the Stormlight Archive to bridge the gap between Mistborn Ghostbloods and Mistborn Space Age, with now Mistborn Cyberpunk is thrown in to be happening at the same time-ish. It follows then that Stormlight Arc 2 will contain, in part, Roshar's journey to the stars and begin the battle therein. Heck, Race and then Taravangian after him both made plans to go to war with the other shards, so we're going to be seeing that happen, I would think, in the back 5 of Stormlight, yet with Taravangian pulling the massive power maneuver at the end of Wind and Truth, it seems like more and more shards are going to come to visit him rather than Roshar developing an awesome space force and going and invading other places for now. So the end of Wind and Truth left me feeling like the War of the Stars was imminent for Roshar, and yet when we read the secret projects, it sounds like it's gonna take a while.
Are we there yet?
We get there when we get there!
We know that the Iriali are departing Roshar at the end of Wind and Truth, and yet by the time we get to Tress's planet, they've been there, done that 300 Lumar years before the events of Tress of the Emerald Sea, which happened before the events of the Sunlit Man, where Sigzil, who also departed Roshar with the Iriali, talks about being on the run with auxiliary for decades and decades since he left Roshar. Not to mention, in Sunlit Man, Sigzil gives us a brief history of the rocket engine and how it's been used in the Cosmere relatively recently to him in its use in interplanetary travel. The science was old, depending on which parts of the Cosmere you visited, but few had ever experimented with it until the last 100 years or so, Why take all the effort to travel the void of space when there were easier ways to travel between planets? Now, with Sunlit Man seeming so far into the future, with the Night Brigade and their ship chasing down Sigzil and his Donshard impression, I figured that this story happened after the events of Mistborn Space Age, because not every plot thread can get wrapped up in a nice bow at the end of an epic series. Some even minor antagonists are just left to go on and do their thing, as there are no endings in true epic fantasy. But then Sanderson released Isles of the Emberdark and told us that Isles of the Emberdark happens after Sunlit Man. And Isles of the Emberdark brings us to a Cosmere divided, with Scadrial and Roshar being at each other's throats, and apparently Scadrial now dealing with the death of a Malwish emperor, which sounds an awful lot like an inciting incident to a grand epic finale if you ask me. So I think that these 3-4 secret projects must happen during or around the start of Mistborn Space Age. Therefore, based on Cosmere Standard Time, Mistborn Space Age must happen at least 300 years in the future from the ending of Wind and Truth. Which is kind of sad and depressing if we think about all of our Radiant friends that we've known on Roshar. It seems like they're going to be super dead by the time Mistborn Space Age comes around. After all, Radiants may live healthier lives, but 300 standard years seems like a stretch. This seemingly necessary 300 years of Cosmere Standard Time passing on Roshar also explains for many fans how Roshar will develop parallel to Scadrial their space forces that can travel faster than light and dominate the Cosmere. But Sanderson, I think, is going to take a different tack that will allow many of our favorite Radiants to still be alive by the time of Mistborn Space Age. And it comes to my favorite concept in the Cosmere and magical worlds in general, time warp. We are already seeing hints that Roshar is not going to have a linear timeline like the rest of the Cosmere. In the Sunlit Man itself, I could have sworn there was a line where Sigzil says that all of his friends at home are dead, or something like that. But then I sat down with my digital copy and word searched for variations of that phrase and could not find it. I put it to Reddit and asked Reddit, and Reddit has not provided me with that precise quote. So if you have that precise quote that's going to discredit all of my thoughts here, please drop it down in the comments. We've got years before these books come out. I can reiterate this theory, but until then, I will leave you with Sigzil thinking about his actual reason of why he could not go home. He was a man who couldn't ever go home, not because of the army that chased him, but because he would never be able to face his friends as the person he'd become. Face his friends, present tense, as in his friends must still be alive for him to face them and be apparently judged negatively by them for his actions. Yes, he would still have friends, probably, that would be alive on Roshar, but I think he's talking about the humans. Despite by his own recollection that it's been decades and decades he's been on the run with Auxiliary, despite our knowledge that the Iriali left Truss's planet 300 years before Truss's story, which means it's been at least 400 years, most people say 500 years, since the Iriali left Roshar, Sigzil still speaks of running into his friends on Roshar in the present tense. Now, there is a distinct possibility that every single other member of Bridge 4, true member of Bridge 4, became a herald like Kaladin did at the end of Wind and Truth. But I doubt it. So is Sigzil just delusional, or does he know something that we don't? Obviously, it's kind of a yes, both, and, but when it comes to the passing of time, I propose that he is not delusional and knows that Roshar's time passage has not been the same as he has experienced it. Sanderson is making an entire magic system on Roshar based on Einstein's theory of relativity. And with the theory of relativity, time dilation becomes such a massive thing. Like, why wouldn't he use this? Sanderson has canonized that investiture equals energy equals mc squared. So we know that if you get a lot of mass in a particular area, time and space warps. And if we get a lot of investiture, that is kinetic investiture, in a particular area, time and space warps. As it warped at the end of Wind and Truth. And Kelsier finally does something useful in the entire history of the Cosmere, gives us actual numbers and a theory of how time is relatively going to pass for Roshar and the rest of the Cosmere. If you left and traveled to another world, decades might pass for you. I don't recommend it unless there is nobody you care about, because when you return, you will be much older than they are. Maybe 70 or 80 years from now, you'll realign with Cosmere Standard? That will seem like a decade or so for you. Now, I'm an arts major despite my love of the theory of relativity. I love its principles, but the numbers, not my thing. Fortunately, Roshar loves the number 10, and I can figure that one out. So let's say that in between Wind and Truth and Stormlight 6, 10 Rosharan years pass, and about 100 years will have passed in the rest of the Cosmere. By that time, the other shards will have gotten their stuff together and commence an attack on Retribution on Roshar, thereby bringing the first type of Cosmere space warfare to a front in the Stormlight Archive over Roshar. And Roshar, being peopled with scientists and intelligent Spren, will develop likewise. But we're also assuming that Kaladin and his heralds will return in Stormlight 6 as well. And I've got this feeling that Stormlight 10 is gonna end with somehow Kaladin and the heralds defeating Retribution once and for all. Whether that be by splintering or some other method we don't know yet, I think there's going to be a lot of kinetic investiture in the area around Roshar again. Therefore, if it's the same dual shard investiture amounts of odium and honor moving in the Rosharan system, we could expect another 10-day Roshars to 100 years Cosmere Standard dilation occurring at the end of Stormlight 10, which would bring Roshar 200 years into the Cosmere future, while only 20 years pass on Roshar. And if we remember that cultivation is in the mix, we could see that time dilation grow further. After all, 200 years is still short of the approximate 500 years that the fandom is speculating happening between Wind and Truth and the events of Tress of the Emerald Sea. Now, I don't have the precise numbers for that yet. In fact, I don't think even Sanderson has the precise numbers for that yet. But Sanderson has repeatedly told us about his writing process, that as a fantasy writer, he begins with the vibes, the concept, the destination, and then works backward to create a magic system that will enable him to get the cool vibes. And I think it's pretty clear that Roshar is Cosmere's Neverland, the place where time passes slowly. You never grow up.
For once you have found your way there, you can never grow old.
Therefore, I anticipate somehow Sanderson is going to get time on Roshar to pass slowly, possibly aligning with Silverlight, where 1 day passes on Silverlight for every 10 days outside of it. And Silverlight, like Roshar has the potential to have, is on the edge of a triple perpendicularity. Also, Roshar just happens to be next to a planet that has a well of investiture on it, attracting souls. And as we know, I equals E equals MC squared. So an investiture well could very easily warp into a time well, thereby making Roshar just pass pleasantly into the future over a couple of decades, where Scadrial and everybody else has to go the long way around. Now, the chief problem I spotted with this theory is that if it only takes Roshar a couple of decades relatively from the end of Wind and Truth to the space age of Isles of the Emberdark, how would they develop the faster-than-light interstellar technology? Well, I'll tell you. Space race. Based on Sanderson's own words, I think it is safe to assume that Scadrial, Cell, Threnody are all going to develop faster-than-light interstellar technology over the period of hundreds of years. Scadrial, the Mistborn world, is my Earth analog. When I was designing, I'm going to design this one in such a way that I can, because I knew I was going to be doing 1900s fictions and a 1980s fiction, I wanted it to have some parallel societal evolution, and so I put a lot of parallel cultural things and things like that. Thus, it is clear that Scadrial is going to have an Earth-like evolution towards interstellar, faster-than-light travel. But I do not think this is going to apply to Roshar. At the time of Wind and Truth, Roshar has basically invented a floating platform that's like a blimp, basically. And yet, as we know in Isles of the Emberdark, they are traveling the stars competently enough to rival Scadrial itself. In Isles of the Emberdark, we are told that they have a functioning space fleet, and we are told that they have competent space technology, but we see very, very little of it. Even the dynamic Starling ship, which is a hybrid of multiple cultural space technologies, only has one item of Rosharan origin. Indeed, it was something of a mongrel. Rosharan anti-grav technology, aether spores from the Datrian planetary network for thrust and engine power, a Scadrian composite metal hull. Never mind, all three technological strains produced their own viable starships without the others. Believe me, I searched all of Isles of the Emberdark to see if there were other mentions of Rosharan technology on the dynamic storyteller's incredible conveyance. There were not. So I wonder, is the scarcity of Rosharan technology on the dynamic because Rosharan technology doesn't adapt well to other systems of star travel or technology? Could it be because you need a soul caster or other radiant type who can connect into the cognitive realm and tell the spren or sphere to be specifically modified so it could adapt to the Datrian system, or what you will? The Skybreaker Cosmere knot we see at the beginning of Isles of the Emberdark seems to be using exclusive spren-based technology to travel the stars, where his armor spren and radiant spren are specifically accommodating his needs, just that his needs are now traveling in space. Thus, I propose that because Roshar is going to be using spren and soul casting in their technological development, it is going to be unlike anything else the Cosmere will display. And we already have a word of Brandon from 2017 that says as much. Roshar has a very different technological path, but they have access to so much more investiture in an easy-to-use format. Roshar is really heading towards what we call magic punk, or things like this mage punk, where you are using a magical power source and things like this. So their technology is going to go weird, but it's going to go fast once they start figuring things out because they have easy access to investiture resources. At the end of Wind and Truth, we already saw Adolin's own, mostly dead I must say, armor spren troubleshoot to figure out how to help him maneuver with a missing limb. And I gotta say, in the Stormlight Archive, there's already a theme of using investiture to help the physically handicapped, and then extrapolating from that to make modes of transportation. Developing technology that allowed Risian's chair to hover in Dawnshard is what canonically allowed for the fourth bridge to soar. So if mostly dead armor spren can adapt to fill in the blank of a missing leg, then very much alive armor spren, I think, can adapt to allow their radiant to breathe the gas they need to breathe out in space. On top of that, we have ancient radiant technology appearing at the beginning of Wind and Truth in the form of compasses that can navigate in the cognitive realm by pointing to the Nell, which is the same level of navigation technology that the entire rest of the Cosmere space age is at when Isles of the Emberdark begins. So, it points to the ancient Radiants already having some theories about how to travel the Cosmere, at least through the cognitive realm, that they just weren't ever able to put into full practice. So by the end of Stormlight 10, our local Radiant favorites who survive will have all of those resources readily available at their fingertips and have the benefit of being by a possible triple perpendicularity, or perhaps some sort of investiture time well, thus giving them the mere decades they need to develop their space force and rival Scadrial in the upcoming space opera that is Mistborn: The Final Age. And most important of all, although I don't ship it, this means that Yasna could totally still be alive at the time of Isles of the Emberdark and be Hoyd's potential future ex-wife who has conveniently forgotten about their relationship. Let me know your thoughts on that or whatever you want down in the comments below. Otherwise, I will see you next week. Thanks for watching. Bye!